Hello and welcome to this RapidDeploy overview tutorial. Today we're going to look at the RapidDeploy architecture, followed by a look at some of the RapidDeploy tool concepts, and then we're going to look at server orchestration, release pipelines, and job execution. Okay, so first of all let's have a quick look at the RapidDeploy architecture. And I've got a diagram here which gives a basic overview of the architecture. In the center you can see the blue box with the automation framework engine within it. And this really is the heart of RapidDeploy. It's a Java web application that you can just download as a zip file, unzip and run. And within that Java web application comes automatically bundled Tomcat 9 and also an internal HSQL database. Now, that database you can replace in your RapidDeploy production environments with Oracle or DB2 or another enterprise database, and we strongly advise you to do that. But for evaluation purposes, you can easily use the HSQL database. The engine that comes with that really controls designing our orchestrations, so our server orchestrations, what is run on a server to do a deployment. The identity and access management, so the identity federation with LDAP repositories, Active Directory, Atom or any other LDAP repository. All of the activity and audit is done in the framework, all of the reporting and creating the environment models, so the different models of what environments we're trying to create. You access that automation framework via a user interface, which you can see above the automation framework. And that has dashboards for management, approvals, pipeline reviews. It also allows you to look at the environment models that you've created and edit them. It allows you to manage and edit your security profiles, your target definitions, your deployment routines, and your data dictionaries. The data dictionaries are the name-value pairs that define differences between environments. We also have a web services interface that you can interact with RapidDeploy with, and a command line interface. And then at the bottom here you can see we've got the plugins box. Now RapidDeploy, all of the functionality really to do deployments is added via plugins. These fall into four main types. There are target plugins, transport plugins, cloud plugins, and toolchain plugins. The target plugins are basically plugins for individual product targets, such as, for example, WebSphere, WebLogic, Tomcat, Oracle, DB2, any tools that you might want to deploy to, those are the targets. Transport plugins, we have the two boxes here on the right, Agent and SSH. These are how we connect to our target servers to run deployments. RapidDeploy supports Agent and agentless with SSH. What you can do with the agent, you can do with SSH and vice versa. You can secure the agent with SSL and a username and password. Then we come to the cloud plugins. These enable us to integrate RapidDeploy into cloud providers such as VMware, Amazon Web Services, Azure, etc. And they allow us to stand up and start and control cloud infrastructure as part of our deployment. So you will have tasks that enable you to run things on target servers to interact with your cloud provider, and you will also have within the tool the ability to back your server definitions, i.e. the definitions of what we deploy to, with cloud providers. And then we have toolchain plugins. Toolchain plugins enable us as part of our deployment or as part of building our tooling or backing RapidDeploy to integrate with various products in the toolchain. So these might be things like SCM products, software configuration management products like Git, Subversion, Rational Team Concert, Team Foundation Server. They might be artifact repositories like Maven, Nexus, Artifactory, and many, many other tools that you can interact with. Okay, so let's move on. Let's now have a look at the tool concepts. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is infrastructure definitions. So within RapidDeploy, you can define the infrastructure that you're going to deploy to. And that's on the infrastructure panel. And you just, from anywhere in the tool, If you just click on that icon of a server, that will take you to the infrastructure panel with a list of all of your infrastructure. Now that infrastructure consists of a list of servers, and we can just create new servers, or in this case I'm going to edit an existing server by just clicking on the edit pencil on the right hand side. And if we go and look at that server, we can see first of all that it has a display name. Now this is a logical name that's shown throughout the application. It doesn't need to have any representation with the actual host name or anything, it's just a display name. And then we can add a number of host names. So a server definition can be one or more actual physical nodes that we can deploy to, and you add additional nodes by adding in their IP addresses or host names or whatever it might be that you can connect to. Or if you're using a cloud provider, here you can just put another logical name that represents the host names in your cloud, and we'll come to that in a moment. You can specify an OS type, and most importantly, you can specify a remote build store. And that is where we're going to copy things onto that target infrastructure in order to run our deployments. You can also switch deployments on or off with the allow deployments, yes or no. Okay, so if we now have a look at the transport, this determines how we connect to the target server. So you can see here that we've got SSH selected as the transport, and we have a whole load of settings that we can set for that. I'm not showing them all here, I'm just showing the top few. But you can specify usernames and passwords and so on and so forth. Alternative execution modes, so I want to connect as one user and run things as a different user. And we can also, so here we see the transport tab, and we can also here see the cloud tab. And the cloud tab allows us to connect to some sort of cloud infrastructure. Here we're using Amazon Web Services. We put in our access key and our secret key, and then we can select which servers we want to control, or we can tell RapidDeploy to create new servers if they don't already exist, and then manage them from then on. And you can tell RapidDeploy to manage a number of servers. So you could say, okay, I want this definition to actually be 10 servers, and you input the number 10, and then RapidDeploy will create that server definition with the name that you gave it on the previous tab, and it will create -1 to 10 of those servers and manage those and start them if they, well, create them if they don't already exist on first deployment, start them if they're not running, and deploy to them. Okay, so each piece of infrastructure, so each server, can have upon it one or more installations. And here we see the installations panel. And you can always get to the installation panel by clicking on that icon at the top there that's highlighted. And this shows us all of the installations and the parent server that installation is installed on. And an installation can be anything. It could be a script that's running on a server in a particular location. It could be a web server installation. It could be a file system. It could be a database. It can be anything you want it to be that's a unit of deployment that you want to deploy to. Okay, here I'm going to just select this WebSphere JPET Store Dev installation. I'm going to have a look at it. There's actually not much detail about an installation. It has an owner. It has a snapshot path. And the snapshot path determines if we take a snapshot of this installation. So let's say it's a file system. We pull a snapshot of that file system back into RapidDeploy so that we can compare how that file system changes over time. We need to give a path of where we want to store that snapshot on the RapidDeploy server. Note, we're not telling it what to actually snapshot here. We do that later on. We do that later on in the orchestration on a project. We'll come to that later. And the other important thing that we specify here is an environment. So an environment determines a number of installations. So an environment contains a number of installations. An installation can only belong to one environment. So for example, we might have multiple servers with multiple different installations on, perhaps a server with a web server, another server with a database, another couple of servers with an application server spread across them, and we put them all into the same environment, and then that's our logical development, say, environment. In this case, we've got WebSphere JPET Store development, so it's a JPET Store application. It's got a web server, an application server, and database. And each of those components we put into an environment, and then we can manage that environment centrally. And here we've also got a parent server which we can click on to go and see. So where is this installation? Okay, and then we've got this concept of a RapidDeploy project. And you can always access a project from the Manage Projects panel. And again, you just click on this icon from anywhere in the application, and that will take you to the list of projects. So when we edit a project, the most important thing that we find on a project is the Orchestration Designer. This determines an environment neutral set of steps that we're going to run on any target installation or target infrastructure that we want to deploy to. Okay, and we can see the steps here and we'll come to those later. So that orchestration, server orchestration, environment neutral, it runs on different targets. And here we specify the targets. We do that on the Targets tab, and here we've got 3 targets specified. For each target we have a server, and that represents the server that we've already spoken about. So where is this going to run? Which set of target infrastructure? What installation are we targeting? We spoke about installations before. It might be a web server, it might be whatever it might be. Okay, and then we have this additional concept of configuration. So let's give an example. Let's say we're running a script on a particular server in a particular installation. So that script might have a location on that server, or we might copy it to the server as part of the deployment. But we want to run that script, but we might have many different configurations we want to run that script in. Perhaps we want to pass different environment variables to that script on different occasions or for different reasons. And this configuration target allows us to differentiate so that we can say, okay, we're running the same script on the same target, but with different environment variables. And then we have the environment that we spoke about before. So this server installation configuration target, so a target being a server installation and configuration, belongs to a particular environment. Okay, when we've got our server orchestration designed, we've got our targets defined with all of our data dictionary values, i.e. the things that make, so all of the configuration that makes that target different from another target, we can create a point-in-time version of that. We do that on the Packages tab, and that contains everything we need to run our deployment, including any external resources that we might pull from any external source, be it a HTTP address, be it a artifact repository such as Maven, or a software configuration management repository, so Git or Subversion. We can pull those things into the package as well. Okay, so now let's just put all that together and look at the project target server installation summary. So a project, as we've already said, has a number of targets. Okay, and a target is actually equal to a server definition plus an installation on that server plus some configuration. And the configuration as defined in RapidDeploy is defined using data dictionary values. It's things that are different between different target environments. So the server plus the installation plus the configuration is equal to the target, and we inject targets into our server orchestration, which is target neutral, to actually run that on specific targets. Okay, so now let's look at server orchestration, release pipelines, and job execution. So firstly, we're going to look at the project again, and here we can see the server orchestration designer that we've already discussed. So as I said before, this is a blueprint that runs on all targets for this project. We can add tasks to this by selecting from a palette of tasks, and the tasks that we have available, and we can see them here in this list, some tasks, will depend on which plugins we have in store. We also have on the right hand side some help about all of the fields of this task and a general overview and description. And we can just easily add a task in to the Orchestration Designer wherever we want it. And these are tasks for functionality, and they might be very simple, like create a folder or create a file, or they might be very complicated, like do a WebSphere deployment to a particular cell, and that might contain a lot of information about what we actually want to do. We also have the ability to add conditionals and loops in here into this Orchestration Designer, and here we've got an if task. We can see we're just checking an output from a previous task, and if it's true we're doing one thing, and if it's false we're doing something else. We can also add failure branches, so what do we do if a certain task fails? We can subscribe tasks to existing failure branches or create new ones for tasks. We can make different calls to tasks depending on what target we're running on. So generally speaking, we want to run all the tasks on all the targets in our route to live. That would be the normal way of doing things, because what we do in one environment we want to repeat in another. But sometimes we need to recognize that there are some environments that we only want to run things in. So for example, in production, we might do a last minute check against a change management system to make sure a ticket's in a certain state before we allow the deployment to run. We only want to do that in production. In a development environment, we might have a task that shuts down all the firewalls before we start running that orchestration on that server, and we certainly wouldn't want to do that in production. We'd only want to do that in our very early development environments. Okay, so when we've added the task, we can configure it, and we just fill in all the values that we want to put in there. So you can see in there we've got the TW automation jar path. This is a DB Maestro task. And we can hard code some values in there. We can use environment variables, so that's a built-in RapidDeploy variable there of archive route, which always points to the expanded archive of the deployment package on the target server. There are many built-in environment variables. You can also use variables in the same form that are output from previous tasks. So any output from any previous task can be used in any later tasks. And we can also use values which are data dictionary values. Now these are at, and then a variable name at. And we define those for each of the targets, and we've already spoken about targets being the configuration of the environment-specific values we want to set for a particular run of this environment neutral orchestration designer in a particular target. We can just add data dictionary values there and then set those for each of our targets that we want to run in if they're different, or we can set them at project scope and then they'll only be overridden by the targets if we put different values in for the targets. Okay, so let's take that server orchestration and let's do that. Let's create some data dictionary values, our variables that are different in each server, and inject them into the server orchestration. So here in the development environment, we're injecting just very simply a URL, a username, and a password for the database for this deployment. And then we do the same thing in our test environment. So this is a different target now. This is our test target. And we've got different data dictionary values that we're injecting. And the same for our production environment. So again, some different data dictionary values. So we've got our three targets. We've got our orchestration designer. Now what we're going to do is put those targets into a pipeline. Okay, so in RapidDeploy we use the pipeline designer. And we create a pipeline, and a pipeline is just a list of targets that we want to run in the order we want to run them, with pipeline steps in between. Okay, so the pipeline steps that we can have here, we've got a manual one, a REST call, and an auto one. There are many, many different pipeline steps, and they depend again on which plugins you've got installed. But you can just add whatever you want. You can add multiple pipeline steps between each project target. And also here we've got an approval that you can see. So we spoke about environments previously being combinations of different server installations. And an environment can have an approval group associated with it, or more than one approval group. And then a user from each approval group will need to approve that deployment before it can be deployed into that environment. Okay, here what I'm doing is adding another component to the pipelines. This is a different project with a different set of targets, but those targets we've got match the targets that we have for the first component. So we're running some script and then we're running the schema update. And we can see we've added that in. So in this case, the two project targets in development run in parallel. We then have a REST call, then another parallel to, and then another parallel to. And you can build this up how you like. You can add parallel or serial jobs. You can branch the jobs and whatever you want to do. What we've also got here is a version of each component that we're deploying, and it is locked for each target in the pipeline. So if we have a pipeline that's going to deploy the script demo and the schema, we've got a version for the script demo and a version for the schema. Of course, they don't have to have the same version number. In this case, they do, but they don't have to. And that version is going to be deployed all the way through to production. Okay, so now we can take this pipeline and customize it to add some rollbacks and some failure branches and so on. What we've got here is we've got the special versions that we can use for rollback. So there's a rollback version, which is the N-1 version that was deployed to that environment. We've also got the special version, new version, which means at the start of this pipeline, create a new deployment package and increment the version number before you start the deployment. And we've got a latest version, so just deploy whatever the latest version is. Quite often when you're testing, you just want to have a pipeline that deploys the latest version so that you don't have to have it create a version as you're going along. So here, every pipeline that we have can have either 0 or 1 rollback pipeline. When you first create it, it will create the pipeline exactly the same as the actual pipeline, putting in all the same project targets and steps, but it will just use the rollback version. You can then edit this to reduce the size. Quite often you won't want to roll back to the development and test environments, only production. So you can put those in. And this rollback pipeline is called only in the case where you've gone through the ordinary pipeline right to the finish node that you can see up in the top right there, and then you find that you have an issue in your production environment. You can then click a one-click rollback, which will invoke this rollback pipeline. We've also got then failure branches here. You can see one failure branch set, but you can set a failure branch anywhere. And this will say, in the event that this project target fails, what do I do? Well, in this case, we're again running a rollback, but you can run anything. You can run an entirely different project if you want. That's a rollback project that does something specific in the event of a rollback. You can create as many failure branches as you want, and you can subscribe any of the project targets that we've got there to any failure branch. Okay. So now if we take this pipeline and we save it and we version it, we call it version of the pipeline 001. We can then copy this pipeline and just change the component versions. So all we have to do is change the version once of the script demo and the version of the schema update, and then we save that as an entirely new pipeline, version 002. And then we can run this second pipeline behind the first pipeline if we want to. Should be noted that once you're running a pipeline, that pipeline can't be rerun whilst it's in progress. So that's why you would then create a separate pipeline with a different version, and that can run behind the first pipeline. Okay, so when we run the pipeline, what do we see in the tool? Well, we see the pipeline running in real time as it runs through. And if we click on any of the individual project targets, we can see that project target as it runs through as well. With its Orchestration Designer, you can see that moving through the tasks as it runs. We can also look at the console if we wish to see the actual logging output in real time. And then after it's finished, we can always view it, so forevermore we can go in there and view how that ran. We can see the pipeline as it looked at the time. We can see all of the individual project target jobs that were run. We can highlight one of those and click on the job, pull that job up. On the left-hand side, we can see what tasks were run. On the right-hand side, we can see what files were copied to the target and then the tasks that were run. And we can click on any task. Perhaps if there's a failure task where you'd see that progress bar would show up in red at the point that it failed. If you wanted to drill right down to see what had gone wrong, you can just click on that link and it will just bring up the log. You can also view the whole logs if you wish to. Okay, so thanks for watching this quick overview of RapidDeploy. In the second part of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is go through all of this again, but actually inside the tool. So my name is Richard Bettison, and thanks for watching.